I'm Emily, and I'm going to be talking about a project that I've been working in 4 years in my PhD. And our main focus has been to quantify aspects of biodiversity and ecosystem function in this long-term native reforestation project. But I really wanted to reflect today on the kind of opportunities that arise from working within existing projects, but also some of the challenges that come from trying to integrate research into a project which didn't have that aim from the outset, and then reflect on some kind of recommendations going forward. So the project in question is in the central Scottish Highlands in Glenafric and Glenmoriston, and is a project that was co-led by Trees for Life, the Forestry Commission Scotland and National Trust for Scotland. And they have been establishing native forests by fencing sites and planting native trees with the aim of restoring Caledonian pinewood habitat. So this project is great because it's been going for up to almost 30 years, and it provides a really good opportunity to actually meet our current research needs, which are really linked to our kind of this explosion of interest in forest expansion and tree planting in the UK, and also within a context which is really relevant to where a lot of this planting might be targeted to. So there's a lot of opportunities in upland areas, and particularly in Scotland. And we really want to understand, I guess, the extent to which different methods of reforestation, different projects can meet certain aims. So by quantifying things like aspects of biodiversity and functions, we can start to answer questions about land use optimization and kind of best scenarios for tree planting in the future. So it's really great to have these existing projects to meet our current needs. But there do come a lot of challenges with working within existing projects. So in my specific experience, one thing that I found was there's often a lack of site history. So in the kind of recent past, and also just even on the longer term, centuries going back, it's not always clear what the land use and management of the sites would have been in the past. And then even in the more recent times, thinking about the life of this project itself, things like methods of planting and planting densities were not always hugely clear. So I would be left with details of kind of like a site of a certain size received this number of trees, but actually lacking that real specific information on densities because the planting would tend to be quite heterogeneous. And then the biggest challenge that I think we found was there's often no baseline data, so it would have been collected at all at the outset of the project, because it was really aiming to just be a conservation project, and no thought for the kind of scientific outputs had gone into the planning of that project. So we were able to overcome some of these issues with our study design. And one of the great things about where we were working is that we were able to use 14 reforested sites and have this really good level of replication. And these sites also represented a chronosequence from about 6 years post-reforestation through to 28 years since reforestation. So starting to be able to explore some of the temporal aspects of reforestation that obviously, otherwise you'd have to wait a long time to explore some of those things. And we used a matched control plot. So we used the unforested areas as a representation of what we assume the prior state to have been, and also mature forest habitat to kind of look at where our reforested plots are relative to the target habitat. So this helped us to overcome some of these issues like lacking baseline data. I thought I'd use as an example, we discovered about carbon sequestration above and below ground. So obviously this is something that's really interesting, and what we found was also quite an important finding. So we found that the above ground carbon in the mature forest sites, which you can see here, is obviously a lot higher than in the reforested sites where the trees have tended to grow quite slowly. But what was particularly interesting was that the soil carbon was pretty similar across our mature and unforested sites up here, but actually significantly lower in the reforested sites. So this suggests that with the reforestation, soil carbon might actually have been lost. But as we lack baseline data, we don't know whether the reforested sites might have been established on areas with initial soil carbon that was actually a lot lower than the areas that we were taking as our prior state. So this kind of shows both the power that using an existing project has to produce some really important and interesting results, on timescales that we wouldn't otherwise achieve. But then it can also show that we then lack a real finer understanding of the mechanisms that might be going on behind some of the results that we find. So then in terms of recommendations, I guess a real reflection that we've had is that it would be really important to collect baseline data going forward. And I guess this seems really relevant as a lot of tree planting projects are happening right now, and more tree planting is being carried out. There's a kind of parallel opportunity to use these projects to capture data for research. And I guess, obviously, there's always going to be limited resources or funding, and it's thinking about what the priorities are. So something like soil carbon, which we tend to have usually information from corona sequences or modeling studies. If we could start to collect some of these data in time series going forward, that would be really powerful to look at its responses in real time. And a final reflection that we really had from working in this project was that it would have been really exciting and possible to introduce some interesting experimental design into this project without compromising on its kind of conservation aim, which is primarily what the project's about. But like things like thinking about areas with different tree planting methods or densities or combination of trees could allow us to explore some really interesting questions and also allow the project to go ahead pretty much as planned. So thinking about these things from the start of a project is obviously really important. So in conclusion, using existing projects is great because, as all of us know who are here, forest establishment is a very long-term process, and we're experiencing this boom in tree planting, and we want to get information right now to inform what we're going to do. So using existing projects gives us a great tool to do that. But also, as we start to establish a lot more different, a whole range of scenarios, thinking about where we can integrate data collection into these, and the key areas where we lack data could be something that would be even more powerful to do going forward into the future. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions.
Thanks, Emily. That was really cool, really exciting to